It's strange how life can make you feel like you're standing on the edge of a cliff, one moment secure and the next teetering into an abyss. That's exactly how I felt 2 years into my relationship with her, my girlfriend, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. We met in college, during those formative years when everything feels infinite, when dreams are still untarnished by reality. She was smart, funny, and had this way of lighting up a room just by walking into it. I fell hard for her, and over time, we built something beautiful together, or so I believe. We talked endlessly about our future. It wasn't just idle chatter. It was planning, dreaming, believing, moving in together, starting a family, maybe even naming our kids. She loved Ella for a girl, and I joked that Jackson sounded cool for a boy. We laughed about it, picturing ourselves 10 or 20 years down the line, a cozy little house somewhere, a dog running around, and children whose laughter would fill the air. These weren't just fantasies. They were blueprints for a life I was certain we both wanted. But what I didn't realize at the time was that while I was busy sketching out these plans, cracks were forming beneath the surface, cracks I refused to see until it was too late. For months, I secretly worked on the ultimate gesture of commitment, a proposal. The ring wasn't extravagant, I couldn't afford much as a grad student, but it was perfect. A simple gold band with a modest diamond, chosen because it reminded me of her, understated yet radiant. I spent countless nights imagining the moment I'd kneel before her, watching her eyes widen in surprise, hearing her say yes. I rehearsed it in my head like a scene from a movie, every detail meticulously planned. I envisioned us celebrating afterward, surrounded by friends and family, basking in the glow of a love I thought was unshakable. But then, just as I was ready to take the leap, everything began to unravel. One evening, she came home from work unusually quiet. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Her job could be demanding, but soon, her demeanor shifted entirely. She became distant, withdrawn, and increasingly critical. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly now felt strained, like we were speaking different languages. Her smiles faded, replaced by a guarded expression I couldn't decipher. And then came the questions, the relentless, probing questions about my friendships, particularly with two close female colleagues. "You spend so much time with them," she said one night, her voice tinged with accusation. "Are you sure there's nothing more between you?" I stared at her, stunned. How could she doubt me after all we'd shared? I tried to reassure her, explaining again and again that these women were simply friends, nothing more. But no matter how many times I said it, she wouldn't listen. It was as if she'd constructed this narrative in her mind, a story where I was the villain and nothing I did could change her perception. Each word she spoke felt like a dagger, slicing through the foundation of trust we'd built. And yet, despite the growing tension, I clung to hope. I convinced myself that this was just a phase, a temporary storm that would pass. I hid the ring away, burying it deep in a drawer, telling myself that once things settled, I'd find the right moment to propose. I imagined her doubts melting away, replaced by the certainty of our love. I held on to that vision like a lifeline, refusing to let go even as the waves crashed harder against me. But looking back now, I realize how blind I was. Every sign was there, glaringly obvious, but I chose to ignore them. Her coldness wasn't just a fleeting mood, it was a fracture widening between us, threatening to shatter everything we'd built. And though I didn't know it at the time, the worst was yet to come. Little did I know that the very foundation I was trying to preserve was already crumbling beneath my feet, leaving me standing on shaky ground with no idea how far the fall would be. It's strange how quickly trust can erode, like sand slipping through your fingers no matter how tightly you try to hold on. That's exactly what happened with her, my girlfriend, the person I thought knew me better than anyone else. At first, her doubts seemed harmless, almost laughable. She'd make offhand comments about my friendships, particularly with two women who had been constants in my life for years, Frenda, who helped me navigate the chaos of nursing school when I was still a wide-eyed newbie, and Friend B, whose late-night shifts became bonding sessions over coffee and shared exhaustion. To me, these friendships were sacred. They weren't just people. They were lifelines during some of the toughest times in my life. But she didn't see it that way. Her suspicions started small, subtle jabs disguised as curiosity. Why do you text her so much? Or you spend more time with them than with me? At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was insecurity or maybe even jealousy born out of love. So, I reassured her repeatedly, explaining that these relationships were purely platonic, nothing more. I even went out of my way to include her in conversations with them, hoping transparency would ease her mind. For a while, it worked, or at least, I convinced myself it did. Looking back now, though, I realize those cracks were already forming beneath the surface, hidden under layers of denial. The real explosion came one evening at a friend's party, a casual get-together meant to celebrate someone's promotion. The air buzzed with laughter, music, and clinking glasses. Everyone was having a good time, including her, at least until the drinks started flowing. She wasn't usually one to drink heavily, but that night, something changed. Maybe it was pent-up frustration, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was just the alcohol loosening her inhibitions. Whatever it was, it unleashed a storm I wasn't prepared for. We were standing near the kitchen island, chatting with a group of mutual friends, when she suddenly turned to me, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "So, tell everyone here how close you are with those two," she said, her tone dripping with venom. My stomach dropped. All eyes shifted toward us, the room growing eerily silent except for the faint hum of music in the background. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my heart was pounding like a drum. "Oh, come on," she snapped, louder this time, her words slicing through the tension like a knife. "Don't act innocent. You think I don't notice? The constant texting, the inside jokes, the way you always run to them whenever I'm not around. Are you sleeping with them too?" The accusation hit me like a freight train. My face burned with shame as the weight of her words sank in. Here I was, surrounded by people I cared about, being publicly accused of something I'd never done. It felt like a betrayal, not just from her, but from the entire situation. Our friends stood frozen, their expressions a mix of shock and discomfort. No one dared to intervene, leaving me stranded in the eye of the hurricane. "I can't believe you'd say that," I finally managed, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. "You know those friendships mean nothing romantic. Why are you doing this?" "Because I don't trust you," she shot back, her voice cracking with emotion. "How am I supposed to feel when you're always choosing them over me?" Her words stung not because they were true, but because they revealed the depth of her distrust. In that moment, I realized how far we'd drifted apart. What once felt like a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding had devolved into suspicion and resentment. And yet, as angry as I was, part of me still hoped we could fix it. I wanted to pull her aside, explain everything, and remind her of all the reasons we fell in love in the first place. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt she planted that night grew roots deeper than either of us could have imagined. After the party, things only got worse. Her accusations lingered in the air like smoke, choking the life out of our relationship. Every conversation became an interrogation, every glance an accusation. I tried to reassure her, to rebuild the trust she'd lost, but it felt like trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape. No matter what I did, she remained unconvinced, her insecurities feeding into a cycle of paranoia that neither of us knew how to break. Looking back, I wonder if there was anything I could have done differently, if I could have seen the warning signs sooner or addressed her concerns before they spiraled out of control. But hindsight is cruel, offering clarity only when it's too late. All I know is that night marked the beginning of the end. It wasn't just her distrust that broke us, it was the way she let it consume her, poisoning everything we had worked so hard to build. The decision to take a break didn't come easily. It was the culmination of weeks, no, months of simmering tension, arguments that never seemed to resolve anything, and an ever-growing chasm between us. At first, I thought it was just a rough patch, something every couple goes through when life gets overwhelming. But as her accusations grew sharper and more frequent, I realized this wasn't just about my friendships or misplaced jealousy anymore. It was deeper, uglier, and far more complicated than either of us cared to admit. We sat on opposite ends of the couch one evening, the silence between us heavy with unspoken resentment. She stared at the floor, her arms crossed tightly over her chest like she was trying to shield herself from some invisible threat. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap somehow, but every time I opened my mouth, all that came out were defensive retorts or half-hearted apologies neither of us believed. Finally, after what felt like hours, she spoke. "Maybe we need space," she said softly, almost hesitantly, as if testing the weight of the words before fully committing to them. "Space," I echoed, my voice cracking slightly. The idea hit me like a punch to the gut. Wasn't space supposed to be for couples who were still figuring things out, not for ones teetering on the edge of collapse? But deep down, I knew she was right. We couldn't keep going like this, circling each other like wounded animals, lashing out whenever we got too close. A break sounded logical, even necessary, but the thought of stepping away from the relationship we built together made my stomach churn. Still, I nodded, agreeing to something I wasn't sure I could handle. The days that followed were surreal. For 2 years, our lives had been intertwined so completely that separating ourselves even temporarily felt unnatural. Every text notification sent a jolt of hope through me, only to fizzle into disappointment when it turned out to be spam or work-related emails. I told myself this was healthy, that distance would give us clarity, but doubt gnawed at me relentlessly. What if she used this time to realize she didn't want me anymore? What if I realized I didn't want her? Then came the discovery that shattered whatever fragile trust remained. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling absent-mindedly through old messages on her phone, which she'd left unlocked on the kitchen counter. I know I shouldn't have invaded her privacy, but curiosity had gotten the better of me. And there it was, a thread of texts between her and someone named Alex, a guy she'd mentioned once or twice in passing as just a friend from high school. Except these messages weren't casual check-ins or nostalgic reminiscing. They were long, detailed conversations about me. About how she doubted my fidelity, how she felt trapped in our relationship, how she wondered if she'd made a mistake choosing me over him. My hands trembled as I read line after line, each word slicing deeper into my already fractured sense of security. "He's always with those women," one message read. "How am I supposed to believe him?" Another, "Sometimes I think about what life would have been like if I'd stayed with Alex." My vision blurred, rage and hurt colliding inside me like storm clouds gathering before lightning strikes. How long had this been going on? Had she been confiding in him while pretending everything was fine with us? Was this why she'd started pulling away months ago? I wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers and explanations, but logic or maybe cowardice stopped me. Instead, I returned the phone to its spot, careful not to leave any trace of my intrusion. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the messages in my mind like a broken record. Each sentence felt like another brick added to the wall between us, solidifying the growing suspicion that her feelings for me had faded long before she admitted needing space. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal, burying my anger beneath forced smiles and neutral tones. But the knowledge burned in my chest like acid, eating away at the remnants of our connection. When she called to ask how I was doing, a perfunctory question devoid of genuine concern, I could barely muster a response. "Fine," I lied, my voice hollow. "Just busy with work." She didn't push further, and I didn't volunteer anything. Silence stretched between us again, thicker and heavier than before. I began to wonder if she even cared about salvaging what we had left. Or worse, if she'd already moved on emotionally, clinging to Alex as her emotional lifeline while leaving me stranded in limbo. Looking back now, I realized that moment marked the true beginning of the end. Before, I'd clung to the hope that our issues were fixable, that love could conquer doubt and insecurity. But discovering her secret correspondence with Alex stripped away that illusion, leaving behind only bitterness and regret. I wasn't just losing her to another man, I was losing her to herself, to choices she'd made without considering the consequences. And though I didn't know it then, the worst betrayal was yet to come. The break was supposed to be temporary, a chance for both of us to clear our heads, reflect on what we wanted, and maybe even come back stronger. At least, that's how I saw it. But life has a cruel way of twisting your expectations into something unrecognizable, like taking a perfectly good photograph and shredding it until all you're left with is jagged pieces. It had been about 5 weeks since we last spoke. 5 long, agonizing weeks where silence stretched between us like an endless void. I tried to stay busy. Work consumed most of my days, but at night, when the world quieted down, my thoughts would spiral. I replayed every conversation, every argument, wondering if there was something more I could have done to prevent this mess. Was I too blind, too trusting, or was she always destined to slip through my fingers? Then came that Tuesday, the day everything unraveled completely. She texted me out of nowhere, asking to meet in person. My heart raced as I read her message. A part of me hoped this was it, the moment she'd apologize, admit she made a mistake doubting me, and tell me she still loved me. Maybe she'd even bring up the future again, the one we used to dream about together. Ella and Jackson, the house, the dog, all those plans that felt so real once upon a time. When I arrived at the cafe where she suggested we meet, she was already sitting there, nervously fidgeting with her hands. Something about her demeanor seemed off. Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine, and her smile looked forced, almost apologetic before she even said a word. I slid into the chair across from her, trying to mask the storm of emotions brewing inside me. "You wanted to talk?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral despite the whirlwind of anticipation swirling in my chest. She hesitated, biting her lip before finally speaking. I made a mistake," she began, her voice trembling. Those 4 words hit me like a punch to the gut, but they weren't enough to prepare me for what came next. After we decided to take a break, I hooked up with someone else. Her confession hung in the air like smoke after a fire, choking me with its weight. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind went blank, struggling to process what she'd just admitted. This was the woman I trusted more than anyone, the person I planned to spend my life with, and now she was telling me she'd betrayed me in the worst possible way. But she didn't stop there. I know, she had to twist the knife deeper. "It wasn't serious," she continued, her voice rising slightly as if trying to justify herself. "It happened twice with a coworker. He was just convenient, I guess." I was confused, angry, and hurt because of everything with us, and I thought. She trailed off, unable to finish her sentence. "Thought what?" I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "That sleeping with someone else would fix things. That betraying me would somehow make you feel better." She flinched at my words but quickly recovered, her expression shifting from guilt to defensiveness. And then she dropped the bombshell that sent my world spinning. "I tried reaching out to you during the break," she said, her tone accusatory now. "I sent messages, hoping you'd respond, but you never did. So maybe you weren't exactly innocent either." Her implication struck me like lightning. How dare she try to shift the blame onto me? As if my lack of response somehow justified her actions. My blood boiled, rage bubbling beneath the surface as I stared at her, incredulous. "Are you seriously trying to say this is my fault?" I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. "You accused me of lying, of being unfaithful, and then you turn around and do the exact same thing, only worse. And now you're blaming me for not responding to your texts while you were off screwing someone else." Her face flushed, whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. "That's not what I meant," she stammered, though her tone lacked conviction. I needed support, and you weren't there." "Support?" I echoed, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think cheating on me is some kind of cry for help? Newsflash, it doesn't work that way. You chose him over me. You crossed a line I can't forgive, no matter how sorry you are." For the first time since the conversation began, she fell silent, her gaze dropping to the table. The weight of her betrayal settled heavily between us, suffocating any remnants of the connection we once shared. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers that would never satisfy me. Instead, I sat there, numb, feeling like I'd been punched repeatedly without warning. What hurt the most wasn't just the fact that she cheated, it was the realization that she viewed me as disposable. After everything we'd built, all the trust we'd established, she threw it away in moments of weakness. And now, instead of owning up to her mistakes, she was trying to paint herself as a victim, using my silence as an excuse to absolve herself of responsibility. As I stared at her, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about how she refused to take accountability for her actions. She wanted me to forgive her, to sweep everything under the rug and pretend nothing happened. But forgiveness isn't earned by shifting blame, it's earned by owning your mistakes and showing genuine remorse. And based on the defensive posture she adopted and the excuses she spewed, I knew she wasn't capable of either. Finally, I stood up, unable to sit across from her any longer. "We're done," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. "Whatever we had, it's over. Don't contact me again." Her eyes widened in shock, but I didn't wait for a response. I walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind along with the shattered remains of what we once called love. The betrayal didn't just shatter my trust, it tore apart the very fabric of who I thought I was. For weeks after that fateful meeting with her, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Every morning, I woke up to the same suffocating emptiness, as if the air itself had been drained from the room. My mind refused to quiet down, replaying every conversation, every accusation, every moment of doubt she'd planted in me over the years. It wasn't just anger or sadness, it was something deeper, darker, an abyss I couldn't climb out of no matter how hard I tried. Sleep became a distant memory. Nights stretched endlessly, each hour marked by the relentless ticking of the clock on my bedside table. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling into chaos. Did she ever really love me? Was our entire relationship a lie? The questions gnawed at me like parasites, feeding on what little sanity I had left. When exhaustion finally claimed me, it brought only restless dreams filled with fragmented memories, her laughter, her accusations, the look of guilt in her eyes when she confessed. And then there was the baby, the child she now claimed was mine but clearly wasn't. It all blurred together into a nightmare I couldn't escape. During the day, I threw myself into work, hoping the physical demands of nursing would distract me. But even surrounded by patients and colleagues, I felt isolated and tethered from reality. Friends noticed. Of course they always do, but I brushed them off with vague reassurances. "I'm fine," I'd say, forcing a smile that never reached my eyes. Inside, though, I was drowning. The weight of everything, her betrayal, the loss of our future, the sheer unfairness of it all pressed down on me until breathing felt like a chore. One evening, desperate for relief, I laced up my running shoes and headed outside. Running used to be my sanctuary, a way to clear my head during stressful times in school. If anything could help me now, this would be it, or so I told myself. The cold night air hit my face as I started jogging, my feet pounding against the pavement in rhythm with the storm raging inside me. At first, it felt good, almost cathartic. But halfway through my route, my body betrayed me. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I stumbled to a stop in the middle of the street, gasping for air as black spots danced across my field of vision. Then everything went dark. When I came to, I was lying on the ground, surrounded by strangers. Someone must have called an ambulance, because the next thing I knew, paramedics were loading me onto a stretcher. Panic surged through me as they strapped me in, asking questions I couldn't fully process. "What day is it? Do you know where you are?" Their voices sounded distant, muffled, as if coming from underwater. All I could think about was how far I'd fallen. How did I end up here? How did my life unravel so completely? At the hospital, doctors ran tests, their faces unreadable as they poked and prodded me. Finally, a neurologist entered the room, clipboard in hand. She explained that while my physical health seemed fine, the combination of chronic stress, sleep deprivation, and emotional trauma likely triggered a seizure. "You're showing signs of PTSD," she said gently, her tone clinical yet kind. "This isn't uncommon after a significant emotional upheaval like what you've experienced." Her words should have been comforting, but instead, they hit me like another blow. PTSD. The term echoed in my mind, heavy with implications. This wasn't just grief or heartbreak, it was something deeper, more insidious. My brain had turned against me, trapping me in a cycle of anxiety and despair I couldn't break free from. As I sat there in the sterile hospital room, numb and hollow, I realized I couldn't keep pretending I was okay. I wasn't okay, and maybe I hadn't been for a long time. My parents arrived soon after, their faces etched with worrying. My mom hugged me tightly, her voice trembling as she whispered, "We're here for you." Her concern broke something loose inside me, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry, not the silent tears I'd shed alone in my apartment, but raw, gut-wrenching sobs that shook my entire body. My dad stood awkwardly beside us, patting my shoulder and muttering reassurances, but his presence was enough. They didn't need to say much, just knowing they cared made the burden feel slightly lighter. Over the next few days, my mom insisted I come home with them to recover. "You can't keep doing this to yourself," she pleaded, her eyes brimming with tears. "Please, sweetheart, let us take care of you." I resisted at first, stubbornly clinging to the idea that I could handle this on my own, but deep down, I knew she was right. I was crumbling under the weight of everything, and staying in my empty apartment wasn't helping. Reluctantly, I agreed, packing a bag and heading back to the house where I grew up. Being home was both comforting and unsettling. Familiar scents and sounds wrapped around me like a warm blanket, but they also reminded me of happier times before she destroyed everything. My parents tiptoed around me, unsure of how to help without making things worse. Friends called occasionally, offering support, but I kept conversations short, unwilling to burden them with my pain. Still, their efforts mattered. Knowing people cared gave me the strength to start picking up the pieces of my shattered life. But recovery wasn't linear. Some days, I felt like I was making progress, finding moments of peace amidst the turmoil. Other days, the darkness closed in again, pulling me back into its suffocating grip. One particularly bad night, I found myself sitting on the floor of my childhood bedroom, clutching an old photo album. Flipping through the pages, I saw snapshots of us smiling, laughing, looking so happy together. Each picture felt like a knife twisting in my chest, a cruel reminder of everything I'd lost. In a fit of rage, I ripped the photos out and threw them across the room, watching as they fluttered to the ground like broken promises. It was in that moment of destruction that I realized something important. I couldn't move forward until I let go of the past. Those memories weren't mine to hold on to anymore. They belonged to someone else, to a version of me that no longer existed. Slowly, painfully, I began the process of rebuilding not just my life, but myself. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew I still had a long way to go. But for the first time in months, I allowed myself to hope. Hope that someday, I'd find happiness again. Hope that I'd emerge stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. It had been months since I last thought of her, months of painstakingly rebuilding my life, brick by fragile brick. The nightmares still lingered occasionally, but they were fading, replaced by a quiet determination to move forward. I was finally starting to feel like myself again, the version of me that existed before she shattered everything. And then, just when I thought I'd closed that chapter for good, she reappeared. She showed up at my door one evening, unannounced and unwelcome, holding a baby in her arms. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at her, frozen in place. It wasn't just her presence that stunned me, it was the weight of what she carried. A child. A living, breathing reminder of everything we'd lost, everything she'd destroyed. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My mind raced, trying to process why she would come here now, after all this time. "What are you doing here?" I managed to choke out, my voice colder than I intended. She flinched but didn't back down, clutching the baby tighter as if he were some sort of shield. Her eyes pleaded with me, filled with desperation and something else, guilt. Regret, whatever it was, it made my stomach churn. "I didn't know where else to go," she admitted softly, her voice trembling. He's part of you too, whether you like it or not." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Part of me. How dare she stand there and claim this child had anything to do with me? I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm despite the storm raging inside. "No," I said firmly, cutting her off before she could continue. "He's not part of me. You made that choice when you decided to sleep with someone else. That's his father, not me." Her face crumpled, and for a split second, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the endless struggle to piece myself back together after she tore me apart. This wasn't about guilt, it was about accountability. She couldn't just waltz back into my life and expect me to clean up her mess. "Where's his real father?" I demanded, my tone sharp. I wanted her to say it to admit that whatever fantasy she'd built around this man had fallen apart. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. "He left," she mumbled, barely audible. "He doesn't want anything to do with us." There it was, the truth I'd suspected all along. She'd gambled on him, thinking he'd be the better option, and now that he'd abandoned her, she was turning to me as her backup plan. The realization burned through me like acid. She hadn't come here because she cared about me or even the baby. She came because she had no one else. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly, each word deliberate and heavy with disdain. "You cheated on me, got pregnant by another guy, and now that he's gone, you want me to step in and play daddy. Just because you're alone." Her expression faltered, and she looked down at the baby, as if hoping he'd somehow soften me. "I'm not saying it like that," she whispered, her voice breaking, "but he deserves a family, a real family. And I thought maybe we could start over, for his sake." I almost laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. Did she honestly think I'd forget everything she'd done? Forget the betrayal, the lies, the way she'd stomped on my trust and walked away without looking back? "Do you really think I'd just forget all of that?" I shot back, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay composed. "That I'd jump at the chance to raise another man's child because you screwed up?" She winced, tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't stop. "This isn't my responsibility. You chose him over me, and now you're dealing with the consequences. Don't drag me into your drama. It's different now," she insisted, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "We could be different. I know you'd make a great dad. You always talked about wanting kids, a family." "Yeah," I interrupted sharply, "with someone who actually respected me. Someone who didn't cheat and lie and then show up months later expecting me to fix their problems because they're desperate." For a moment, silence hung between us, thick and suffocating. Then she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I messed up, okay, I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd be safe. If things didn't work out with him, I mean." Her confession hit me like a freight train. Safe. That's what I was to her, a fallback, a safety net in case her risky gamble failed. All those plans we'd made, all the dreams we'd shared, they meant nothing to her. I was never her first choice. I was just the guy she could rely on when things went south. "No," I said firmly, stepping back and opening the door wider. "This is your life now, not mine. I'm not raising another man's child just because you made a mistake. It's time for you to leave." She stared at me, stunned, tears streaming down her face. For a brief moment, I felt sorry for her. She looked broken, defeated, like someone drowning in regret. But sympathy wasn't enough to change my mind. I'd fought too hard to rebuild my life, to reclaim my sense of self-worth, to let her drag me back into the chaos she'd created. Without another word, she turned and walked away, cradling the baby tightly against her chest. I closed the door behind her, leaning against it as a wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Relief, anger, sadness, it all swirled together, leaving me drained but resolute. Whatever tiny shred of doubt I'd harbored about letting her go vanished in that moment. She wasn't my problem anymore, and for the first time in a long time, I truly believed I deserved better. The moment she stood there, holding that baby and pleading with me to step into a role I never asked for, I felt the walls I'd painstakingly rebuilt around my heart begin to tremble. For months, I had worked tirelessly to reclaim my sense of self-worth, to silence the echoes of betrayal and doubt she had planted in my mind. And yet, here she was, her presence alone threatening to unravel everything I'd fought so hard to rebuild. "You don't understand," she whispered, desperation dripping from every word. "I thought we could fix this. We were supposed to be a family." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a fleeting second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the endless battle to piece myself back together after she shattered me. This wasn't about guilt or compassion anymore, it was about boundaries. She couldn't just waltz back into my life, wielding memories like weapons, expecting me to surrender my peace for her convenience. "Fix what?" I shot back, my tone icy and unyielding. "You made your choice when you decided to sleep with someone else. That's not my problem, it's yours. Don't try to drag me into your mess because you're scared of facing the consequences." She flinched at my words, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the baby tighter against her chest. "But we had something special once," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "All those plans we made, all those dreams, they meant something, didn't they?" Her attempt to tug at my nostalgia hit me like a slap across the face. How dare she stand there and invoke the past as if it hadn't been obliterated by her actions? The audacity of it infuriated me. My jaw tightened as I stepped closer, my eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that left no room for negotiation. "Those dreams are dead," I said coldly, each word deliberate and sharp. "You killed them the moment you chose him over me. Whatever we had, it's gone. It died a long time ago, and nothing you say can bring it back." For a split second, she looked like she'd been struck. Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but no sound came out. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, thrusting it toward me with shaking hands. "Please," she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just read this, it explains everything." I stared at the letter, my stomach churning with conflicting emotions. Part of me, a small, irrational part, wanted to take it, to see if there was some shred of redemption buried within her words. But the stronger, more rational side of me knew better. Reading that letter wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't erase the pain she caused, nor would it absolve her of the choices she made. If anything, it would only reopen wounds I'd spent months trying to heal. "No," I said firmly, stepping back and crossing my arms. "Whatever you have to say, you've already said enough. I'm done listening to excuses, done letting you manipulate me into feeling responsible for your mistakes." Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks as she realized I wasn't going to budge. She hesitated for a moment, clutching the letter tightly before finally setting it down on the table beside me. Without another word, she turned and walked away, the weight of defeat evident in every step. As the door closed behind her, I exhaled sharply, leaning against the wall as a wave of exhaustion washed over me. For a moment, I considered picking up the letter, curiosity gnawing at the edges of my resolve. But deep down, I knew it was better left untouched. That letter was a relic of a past I no longer belonged to, a past I refused to let define me any longer. Instead, I grabbed the envelope and tossed it into the trash without opening it. Watching it disappear beneath the pile of discarded junk felt strangely cathartic, like I was severing the final thread tying me to a chapter I desperately needed to close. Whatever regrets or confessions she had written inside didn't matter. They couldn't undo what had been done, and they certainly couldn't force me to carry the burden of her poor decisions. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of clarity. She had chosen her path, and now she had to live with the consequences just as I had lived with mine. I wasn't her safety net, her fallback option, or her scapegoat. I was a man who had finally learned to prioritize his own well-being over the chaos someone else created. As I stood there, staring at the empty doorway where she had stood moments earlier, I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. Oh, I still felt the sting of betrayal, the lingering ache of what might have been. But beneath it all was a newfound strength, a quiet confidence that I deserved better than the life she tried to pull me back into. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. It's strange how life has a way of testing you, pushing you to the brink of your limits before finally granting you a moment of clarity. For months, I had been clawing my way out of the darkness that her betrayal left behind, a darkness so suffocating it felt like I was drowning in shadows. Every day was a battle, against memories, against guilt, against the lingering ache of what could have been. But now, standing here on this quiet trail surrounded by trees swaying gently in the breeze, I realized something profound. I was free. The weight I'd carried for so long, the anger, the resentment, the endless questioning of myself had finally lifted. It wasn't an overnight transformation. It had taken countless sleepless nights, panic attacks, and moments of sheer despair to get here. Yet, as I ran along the path, my feet pounding rhythmically against the earth, I felt lighter than I had in years. The air seemed fresher, the sunlight warmer, as if the world itself was welcoming me back into its embrace. I no longer felt like a ghost haunting my own life. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt truly alive. And then, just as I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw her. She was sitting on a bench near the edge of the park, sketching something in a notebook. Her hair caught the light, glowing softly like spun gold, and there was an ease about her posture that made her seem almost otherworldly. I slowed to a stop, unsure why I felt compelled to approach but unable to ignore the pull. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fate nudging me forward. Whatever it was, I found myself walking toward her, my heart thudding inexplicably in my chest. "Hi," I said, my voice hesitant but steady. "Mind if I interrupt?" She looked up, startled at first, then smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Not at all," she replied, closing her notebook and setting it aside. "What's up?" For a moment, I faltered, unsure of what to say. This was uncharted territory for me. After everything I'd been through, the idea of talking to someone new felt both exhilarating and terrifying. But something about her calm demeanor put me at ease. "I was just running," I began, gesturing vaguely behind me. "And I noticed you sitting here. You looked peaceful." Her laughter was soft, melodic, peaceful. "That's not usually how people describe me." She tilted her head, studying me with an expression that was neither judgmental nor intrusive. "You look like you've got a story to tell." Her words caught me off guard. Did I? Was it written all over my face, the scars of heartbreak, the battles fought, and won within myself? I hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Maybe I do. But I think I'm finally ready to start writing a new chapter." There was a pause, during which she simply watched me, her gaze thoughtful. Then she spoke again, her tone gentle yet firm. "Sometimes, we hold on to things for too long. Pain, regret, fear. Letting go isn't easy, but when you do, it feels like breathing again." Her insight struck a chord deep within me. It was as though she could see straight through the walls I'd built around myself, past the defenses I didn't even realize I still clung to. In that moment, I understood that I wasn't just ready to move on, I was eager to let someone else in, to share pieces of myself without fear of being broken again. We talked for a while longer, exchanging small details about our lives. Her name was Claire, and she was an artist who spent most days outdoors, capturing the beauty of nature in her sketches. There was a simplicity to her presence, a kindness that reminded me of the person I used to be before bitterness took root. As we parted ways, she handed me her number scribbled on a scrap of paper. "If you ever feel like grabbing coffee or going for another run," she said with a wink, "you know where to find me." Walking away, I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just the promise of a potential connection, it was the realization that I deserved one. For so long, I'd punished myself, convinced that I wasn't worthy of happiness after everything that happened. But now, standing under the vast expanse of sky, I knew better. I had earned this second chance, this opportunity to build something real, something meaningful. That night, as I lay in bed replaying our conversation in my mind, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just about Claire, it was about me. I had survived the storm, weathered the chaos, and emerged stronger on the other side. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but for the first time, I believed I could handle whatever came next. I was done looking back. The past was exactly where it belonged, behind me.